everyone, welcome back to Eaddy's Craft Room. I'm Hannah Catherine Brand. Today we are going to dig into the 2024 Kona Solids Block of the Month with some fun charm packs. You all were so helpful on my last video in helping me decide which project I should tackle next, and so many of you suggested this one because I was so close to finishing it and having the satisfaction of sending it off to the long armor to finally bind and enjoy the quilt. So that's what we're gonna do. I've actually already made some progress on it off camera since that video, so thank you for helping me get some of my momentum back. This is one block that I did, and I loved these purples. It's been a little bit cooler in my area, and so that's had me in a little bit of a fall mood, and so I thought these purples, as well as especially this collection of oranges, were perfect for this time of year. So I'm sure it's just a little bit of a false tease. It's probably going to get hot again, but I am enjoying it while it lasts, and I love fall fashion, so I did a little bit extra today. So anyway, these are my blocks. As a reminder, I am not following the pattern exactly, and actually this is a free pattern. I will link it down below. It is from Kona, and it utilizes all of their solids. I don't know if it's all of their solids, but quite a few. I purchased at the beginning of the year a pack of 12 of these charm packs, and you can see they have a gradient of colors in them. They are really beautiful, and let me tell you, it was probably one of the most satisfying unboxings I've ever done of fabric, just seeing all of them just so beautifully stacked up like this and getting to see all of the gorgeous colors together. And it really has been fun making these blocks. So I've shown you the rest of my blocks in previous videos. I will link that above so we don't have to repeat here, but let's go ahead and select one of these charm packs and get to work. Let's start with our charm squares. This is a beautiful range of blue, so you know I'm extra happy to be working on this block with these fabrics, and we get to cut into them and see what we have here. So I told you before, I am not using background fabric. I am basically trying to maximize my usage of the charm squares. This is more than enough charm squares than you will need for these blocks, so I wanted to not be wasteful. So what I've been doing is essentially sorting them by, I believe the term is value, if I have my art terms correct. So what that looks like is I go through and I kind of just sort out lightest to darkest. So this one I think is probably the lightest we have. So this will be our background fabric. And then I think, yeah, here's another light one. Here's a set of light ones. Okay, that's probably enough. The background fabric it calls for is actually a fat 1/8, so that's more than we'll need. So I'll just kind of select the squares that work out of this pile. And then we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we need 6 other fabric selections. So in ranging from lightest to darkest, what I kind of do is just pick the next one up in terms of value that's going to have the most contrast with this, because I don't want it to blend in. Like, I want it to be obvious that this is the background fabric, even though we have some different color options here. So I think something like maybe that. Yeah, I think something like these two could be good. So this will be our fabric A. I have my alphabeties over here, our fabric A, and this is going to be our fabric B. And then let's see, this is actually a pretty solid color. Well, they're all solids. I just meant a good choice. Let's see. I really like these. And that's the challenge, is like I like so many of the colors. Maybe we do it kind of like that. I definitely want a navy in there. I love navy. So this will be our darkest color. I'll just go ahead and mark that there. We can actually set this off to the side just to give us more space to go through and sort. So B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, so we need to find one more, or you know what, we could do that, and then maybe something in between here. I'm thinking we've already done quite a few blocks with some of these more royal colors, so I think I might go ahead and omit that. This looks like it's a pretty good match for that section. And stick more with the, not that these are pastels, but you know, they're close. I do like the aquas though. So what if we kind of bump this up? Does that make sense? We go like that. There's really, you know, there's some strategy to it, but there's not like a wrong answer. And actually, so this is the challenge, is sometimes I'll find one that I like, but then there's not really another one in here that's fairly close. So that might not be a problem, but I need to check the pattern just to make sure. And sometimes if there's like two of one or two very close together, I'll kind of just like stack them in this pile so that I know I have additional fabric. There have been some of these blocks where I've had to truly, I mean, like sew squares together and then cut because the piecing requirements was more than a 5-inch square. Okay, this is definitely more background. Okay, you know what? I think I might need to replace this, and we might be able to do so. Yeah, like that. But then I was saying I wanted to stay away from royal, so maybe something like that. Ooh, I like that. That's pretty. Okay, so I'm just gonna label D, E, F, G, and that is how I'm selecting my fabric. Here's my background fabric, and so now it's time to get cutting. All right, I'm gonna have a lot of leftover because apparently we only need 2 4 7/8 inch squares. So what that means is we're gonna have a ton left over. I'm just gonna pick the two that are closest and lightest, which I think are these two. And we're gonna be able to cut these just at one time. So I'm gonna stack them up just like this. And it's just a very small trim, just because if you aren't familiar, a charm square is a 5-inch square. Although I always do recommend truly measuring it to get a sense, especially with these peaked edges. You just never know. You know, fabric is fabric. It does move. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 looks good. And then, yeah, it's just like a hair on the end. So it's pretty close, but you can see if you're measuring, you know, peak to peak of the pinked edges, it is bigger than a 5-inch square. And now if you're measuring valley to valley, it's actually still bigger. So that's why I just encourage you to always measure your pre-cuts. That was something I learned a little bit later after I learned how to quilt. I just kind of trusted the fact that, like, oh, it says 5-inch square, so it's a 5-inch square. Not always. So 1, 2, 3, 4 7/8. Just line this up here. Do a good cut. Same thing here. Just want to make sure we're really lined up. It's amazing how something can look completely straight from one angle, and then not so straight from another. So just checking, I have messed this up before, so I would love to avoid that again. All right, so after I have my squares, it's subcut each square once on the diagonal, so that's easy enough. We'll just go corner to corner here and cut. And there are our fabric A pieces all done. It's fun when they're nice and easy like this. Okay, so fabric B. This is where it gets interesting if you're just using the charm pack. So it says cut 1 5 1/4 inch width of fabric strip, subcut 1 5 1/4 inch square, then subcut the square twice on the diagonal. Trim the remainder of the strip to 2.5 inches, subcut 4 2.5 inch squares. Okay, so what you could do with this, you could, so I guess it would be, you would have to do it 4 squares together and then trim down to 5 1/4 inches. I have done that on some of the blocks that require something bigger, like I think one block required like an 8.5 inch square. This is not that much of a difference, and actually since, let's see, since these were a little big, or at least my measurement on the last one was a little big anyway. Okay, yeah. So see, we're at like 5 1/8. So we're off about 1/8 of an inch. What I do, and I think the quilt police are gonna be horrified by this, but I just make up for it in my seam allowance. I know that having a shorter seam allowance is going to be tough for lining up points and also not keep the integrity of the quilt long term as much as having that true 1/4 inch seam. I make a lot of quilts. I don't even use all of them. You know, they're just for beauty. So this is just my fun thing. So I am showing you based on the cost benefit analysis that I have done on these. I am not going to sew 4 together and trim down to 5 1/4. I'm going to take this square, treat it as 5 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to do exactly what it says and subcut twice on the diagonal. So one there, and this is where our rotating cutting mat comes in handy, is for pieces like this. And that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna roll with it. Just like this. We are just improvising. Okay. So there are those triangles. Now, the other thing it says is it has assumed you've cut a 5 1/4 inch by width of fabric strip. We didn't do that. So I just kind of go to the bottom of the pattern and see that ultimately what we need are 4 2.5 inch squares. Now that is really easy because 2.5 plus 2.5 is 5. So all we need to do now is just take this other square that we set aside and make sure it truly is 5 inches. So that's just a little sliver I'm trimming off. And then same thing over here, just getting it down to 5 inch cut. You know, I feel like when you make shortcuts like I did on the first one, or not shortcuts, but just improvising, accuracy matters even more on the other side of things. So now all I have to do is trim my 2.5 inch squares. So here is one cut. This should be halfway, and I just visually check that and it looks good. And then flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. I really take my time. You know, they say like measure twice, cut once. I know I'm slower than probably a lot of other people who quilt, but I'm sure some of that comes with time and experience, but I just don't trust myself. So we'll put these aside, and fabric B is done. Now we have fabric C. This one, pretty simple. We are just cutting 8 2.5 inch squares. So what I can do is just, I'll find the two that are most similar in this stack, which looks like these two. I'm gonna put this one aside. And then I'm just gonna do the same thing here, where we're just truly trimming down to 5 inches so we have an accurate cut. And here we go. 2.5. And 2.5. And there, 2, 4, 6, 8 are 8 2.5 inch squares. Okay, we are just flying. So D, here we go. So the pattern instructions say 1 4.5 inch by width of fabric strip. We don't have that, but we need to subcut it into 1 4.5 inch square. Easy enough, we just trim this down. And then trim the remainder of the strip to 2 7/8 inch, subcut 4 2 7/8 inch squares, then subcut each square once on the diagonal. So what that means, actually, yeah, look at that. We grabbed the perfect amount of fabric. So we'll trim this one down to 4.5 inches, easy. Then we need 4 2 7/8 inch squares. Well, because this is only a 5 inch square, you do the math, you can't get 2 of those out of this cut of fabric. So what you do need is you're gonna need 4. And actually this is not perfect. So I'm gonna go back to my remaining charm pack and see if I can find a fabric that looks fairly similar. And actually, yep, there it is. So that's kind of the fun and challenge of this, is doing stuff like this. So I will need, out of all of these pieces of fabric, to get 1 2 7/8 inch square out of each of them. So let's trim this one down first. This will be easy and fast. I think what I love about this quilt is I'm cutting small pieces of fabric, which, if you've heard me talk before on this channel about my distaste for cutting large pieces of fabric, you know that this quilt and I were a match made in heaven. There is, you know, an extra challenge with having to kind of improvise with some of the cutting instructions, but, you know, if it means that I don't have to cut like a big piece of fabric, and you know what, one day that will probably change, because I like cutting, especially after I learned really how to cut. I do enjoy this part of the process. It's just a matter of, you know, I just don't really have the space to do it like back and forth from my sewing machine. Like I would have to get up. So that's why when I cut my fabric for like a quilt with using yardage, I do it at my counter where I'm standing, and I just kind of knock it all out at that point so that I can use this table, which we're at the table that my sewing machine sits on. I just do the small cutting here and use a mat like this. So that is my current process, but one day I would love to have like a big cutting table in my craft room. That is the goal. Okay, 2 7/8 inch. So this, you know, I stacked up all 4 pieces of fabric. This is not perfect on either of these sides. Don't freak out. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna cut big and then trim down, because otherwise it's a mess. So we'll cut, actually I'm gonna cut 4 inches. We'll do this. There's definitely a faster way to do this, but like I said, this is just how I take my time. Okay, so what's great, now we have like perfect clean cuts. So now I can go in and do the precise measurement. There is 2 7/8. And then flip it around to this side, to the other clean cut. And there is 2 7/8. Great, so this will go in my D stack. Now E and F, it's the same process. So I'm only just gonna show you one of them for just time's sake. You are basically needing 4 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles of each fabric. So that means I only actually need one of these charm pack squares to make this happen. So I'll pick my favorite. I like this one. And I can save these for later. There is a half square triangle border on this quilt, so those extra pieces will definitely go to good use. And actually, no, that's a lie. I need 2. Because I can only get 2 out of each. Sorry about that. Math was never my strong suit, and it's so funny because I love quilting. Okay, there we go. So just cutting a 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangle, 2 from each of these, so 4 total. And then we can move on to the last bit of fabric. Here's that. We need 1 4 7/8 inch by width of fabric strip stud, cut 4 4 7/8 inch squares, then subkit each square once on the diagonal. And then we need 4 4.5 inch squares. Okay, so this is where things get tricky. Basically, what we're gonna need to do is we're gonna need 8 pieces of this value of fabric. So I am gonna start pulling. Do that, and basically I'm just gonna select 8 of the darkest and then trim down. So with that, that will be our cutting, and then we can get to the piecing. We have all of our pieces cut. One thing I did want to flag for you though, and I'm actually a little upset with this pattern for this, but you know what, we're just gonna roll with it. Come over here to the pattern, and sorry, I'm moving you, but this is, you know, the sample block, looks great and everything. Here's the first page of the pattern with the cutting instructions. In all fairness, it does say, read through all the instructions before beginning. I didn't do that, so anyway, but in case you're like me, see how the gradient here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it goes lightest to darkest? That's how I based my cutting. Now, if you scroll all the way down to the end of the pattern, you will see the gradient is like non-existent and actually really almost goes in the opposite direction. So what that means is our fabric G, it's not going to be white. It's not going to be that background fabric. It's going to be actually the darkest fabric. And our fabric A is going to be the lightest fabric. So that's going to be something that I want you all to be aware of, as well as myself. And also, if you are going and making this block or this pattern, check this if you want it to look anything like the sample. Mine already aren't going to, just because I'm not using background fabric and I'm using a range of different colors. So it's fine, but this is just kind of all part of this experiment of me doing a little bit different of a quilt, but just wanted to tell you that too. Our first assembly is we're going to be taking our fabric A and fabric G triangles, and we are going to be making some half square triangles with these. If I can guess, I think this is going to be our corner units, our corner half square triangles. So I went ahead and, with that in mind, cut all of my fabric G triangles. I tried to choose the fabrics that were closest there, and remember we needed 8 of these. There's not 8 of these in the charm pack. So what I did was I kept the cuts, like I kept the same color fabric with the same cut. So this was one cut that I needed to do these squares, and this was another cut I needed to do these triangles. So these are more the navy, these are more the royal, and that's how I made that decision. So in an effort to have all of my corner half square triangles be uniform, that was why I made those cutting decisions. So I'm just gonna go through here and sew these all up, and then once I get them sewed up, I will press, I believe it says toward the darker fabric, so that's nice and easy. And then I will go ahead and square them up to be 4.5 inches if needed. Hopefully these are accurate enough that I won't need to do that, but sometimes I do, just depends upon what type of day I'm having. Our next step is to make some flying geese. So the instructions tell you to take the fabric B and D triangles, and you're basically just sewing the triangles together. Now this is a different flying geese method than I really use. I have never used this before except for in this pattern. I've heard some people do the Eleanor Burns method. I've never actually looked into what that is. I don't know if that is this method, but either way, just keep in mind it's a little bit different and does cut down on waste. So I'm just going to be piecing like this, and you'll just put one triangle on one end, press out, one triangle on the other end, press out. And keep in mind, these are our triangles that were cut a little bit short. So we need to keep that in mind, and you can kind of see that here when you line it up against the triangles that were cut correctly. So I'm going to be just placing this a little bit over the edge, like 1/8 of an inch over the edge of this triangle. Again, I'm making up for the loss of fabric there in my seam allowance. So now I'm just going to press what we've been working on, and then I'll trim down. But what's really cool about these blocks is I do feel like they come together fairly quickly. Actually, with what we've made so far, these half square triangles and also our flying geese units, we already have what we need to make the center star unit of this block. So that's really exciting. It really is just the fabric selection process, I think, that takes the longest, and the fact that you're cutting block by block as opposed to making a quilt where all of the blocks are the same, or you only have 1 or 2 blocks that are the same and you're just like turning. It's the fun of a sampler quilt. I like to keep things interesting. And actually giving myself the grace of the seam allowance worked out perfectly. Look at that. Look at that half. It's not a half square triangle. It's a half of a flying geese, but yeah. So see, it works out. I don't have a true 1/4 inch seam allowance on it, but it's gonna look nice. And do you know what? If something happens to my quilt, I will either fix it or I'll just make a new one. So now that we have our pieces to make the star, we'll just stitch this up into rows. I like to think of it like this, and I credit Donna Jordan with that. It's just so much easier to think about things in rows. And then we'll stitch these together, and then each row will get stitched together to make our unit. And there she is, all finished with this part. So now to move on to some other action items here, we are going to be taking the fabric C squares and the fabric G squares. Let's see. I'm actually, sorry, I've been sitting here for a while reading this pattern. It says gather the 2.5 inch fabric C squares and 4.5 inch fabric G squares Mark a diagonal line on the wrong side of each fabric D square. Place a marked square on one corner of a fabric G square. So I think that's a typo, which as someone who's written a pattern before, I completely understand. I think based on what I'm seeing, they meant marking a line on the wrong side of fabric G, or excuse me, fabric C, because what they're showing is that these are going to go like this in the corner, and then they'll just be folded down like that. And then you're just making 4 of these. So I'm gonna hope for the best, but I think that's right. And what will eventually happen, just looking forward, is we'll take these rectangles, the fabric E and the fabric F rectangles, and these are gonna go on either side of this unit. This is gonna be a funky looking block. And I'm assuming that it's gonna be like this. Do we divide it up? No, we don't. Okay, so it says sew a fabric E rectangle to the right side of this completed unit, and then an F rectangle to the left side, and then we'll press the seams out that way. So yeah, we got a lot of colors going on here. It's really going to be interesting to see how this shapes up. But essentially, once we're done with this unit, these are going to be the outer units that are going to surround this star unit. We will be done, and we'll get to laying that out in just a minute, but that's really all that's left. So I'm gonna sew these up and then attach these 2 units, press, and we'll be ready to lay everything out and sew it together. Our piecing units, I don't know if that's a real phrase, but you know what I mean. They are done. So now it's time to lay out this block. And I believe we are just going like this. Should probably make it so you can see it. This is just such a fun part. I'm making it so I think the dark go on the outside. Although, I mean, gosh, at this rate, because this was such a like weirdly colored quilt block just because of the pattern thing. I don't know. What do you think? I could also, I feel like that might be cooler. Yeah, I kind of like that better. These turned in like that. Yeah, I think that's it. Kind of, it makes, you know, it's the inverse. I mean, obviously, because I cut the light thinking this was the background pieces and the dark thinking these were, you know, more of the accent piecing, but I think we should roll with that. And like, I like that. It's kind of fun. There's a lot of colors going on in this block, but I don't know. It's kind of cool. It's a very contemporary look. So at this point, it's just a matter, again, of sewing everything into rows and then sewing the rows together. And through the magic of editing, here is the finished quilt block. And there she is. I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me in this a little bit kooky, crazy block. It is certainly an improvisation, but hopefully once it's all together in the quilt, it's really gonna look nice. And it was fun to have a little bit of a challenge to try something new. That's going to do it for me here today in Eaddy's craft room. Thank you so much for joining me and encouraging me as I finish this quilt. I am so excited to finish it and jump into the next one. I hope you enjoyed today. If you did, please give this video a like, leave me a comment. I do try my best to answer every single one of them, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos just like this. But until next time, have a wonderful rest of your week and happy crafting. Bye-bye.